You know, so anyway, we're live on YouTube. That gives me the indication it's 7 o'clock. So I will say good evening, councillors, and welcome to the meeting of the Planning and Licensing Committee. Please note that this meeting is being streamed live to the internet. Please could all members ensure their microphone is set to mute unless they are speaking. It is important to remember that you may only speak when called by myself. Also ensure any other devices nearby are switched to silent mode as they can be distracting. Members should use the raise hand button when they wish to speak. When it is your turn to speak, I will call your name and invite you to speak. Once you have spoken, I will flatten your hand. All votes will be taken by roll call. When the name of each member is read out, they must respond with either for, against or abstain. As the chair of this committee, I would like to make a statement for the benefit of the councillors present at this meeting and for the members of the public. The applications before you, and indeed any applications you consider in the future, must be considered on planning merits only. It is essential that members adhere to this principle and ensure that their decisions are based on the papers before you and any information provided to you during this meeting. This is not the forum to discuss any ancillary issues relating to the planning applications before you. We will now move on to apologies for absence, please.
No apologies this evening, Chairman.
Excellent, thank you very much. Item 2, declarations of interest, councillors. No declarations, excellent. Item 3, the minutes. To consider and approve the correct record of minutes of the meeting held on the 23rd of March. Are those minutes agreed, councillors?
Agreed.
All happen?
Agreed.
Excellent. Turn them off mute. Now we go to the planning applications. We'll take them in the order on the supplementary information, which is much the same as the agenda. So the first being number 1, 200467, land adjoining Cold Harbour, Blackhouse Hill, and Rob Allen's going to take us through it. Good evening, Rob. Thank you.
Good evening, Chair. Good evening, members. This application is for the erection of two-storey detached dwellings within the grounds of the existing property known as Cold Harbour, which is located here. The application site is located inside the defined settlement boundary, but is also within the designated Kent Downs area of outstanding natural beauty and North Downs special landscape area. The site is immediately adjacent to established residential development, as can be seen on the map, bordered by dwellings on three sides. The character of the development in the area is of predominantly detached dwellings in spacious or relatively spacious plots, with a wide variety of architectural styles, with two-storey dwellings, bungalows, chalet bungalows evident, all constructed in a broad palette of materials, including brick of various colours, cladding, natural stone, such as ragstone, clay, plain tiles, and concrete tiles. The application site itself is accessed from an existing access from Blackhouse Hill, which is to the north site, which runs between two dwellings, 3 Bassett Gardens, that's at the far end of this picture here, and Hillwood House over here, and serves the property Cold Harbour, as well as 40 and 42 Blackhouse Hill. This is the view east, looking slightly up the hill towards number 40, which can be seen here. That's the garage number 40. This is the view south toward Cold Harbour, which can be seen here through the gateway. This is a building that is to be retained, but is outside of the application boundary, forms part of the sort of curtilage buildings of Cold Harbour. This is the view southwest into the application site, with the boundary wall of Cold Harbour to the left-hand side of the picture. Further into the site, we can see the view west across the application site area. We can see fruit cages in the foreground and general domestic garden sort of area. This is slightly further indeed into the site towards the northern boundary of the application site, looking southwest, where you can see the roof for number 36A, Blackhouse Hill, and you can note the level changes here. This property is set slightly lower into the site. And another view toward 36A from the garden area. You can see the established hedgerow that runs between the properties here. This is in approximately the same location, but looking east up the hill towards number, I believe, 40 and 42 Blackhouse Hill. And here's part of the outbuildings that we saw earlier that framed the entrance to Cold Harbour, which is somewhere over here. You will notice, obviously, the change in land levels again. This is the view northeast from approximately the same point again, showing the fruit cages and the vegetation that runs along the northwestern boundary of the site. As I mentioned before, the proposal is for 2 detached dwellings, accessed from the existing driveway. As can be seen on this plan, it can be accessed by a full-size refuse vehicle, but as members will have noted within the report, it's been confirmed that a smaller vehicle is already used at this site, which is confirmed by Veolia, the waste contractors. Both buildings are proposed to have a predominantly upside down arrangement with 3 bedrooms of the sleeping accommodation on the lower ground floor and the main living areas and kitchen on the upper floor. That's the handed drawing, which is property to the easternmost side. So the properties are virtually identical, just handed. This is the view of the rear of the properties from the south looking north. As you can see here, you've got the lower ground floor of the properties where the sleeping accommodation is, and the upper floors where the predominant living and accommodation is, and kitchen areas, etc. This is the western elevation of plot 1 for members to see. And you can see there where the approximate ground levels are shown, and the lower ground floor is partially sunk into the site, giving from the sort of threshold there the appearance of a bungalow style dwelling. This is the eastern elevation of plot 2, western elevation of plot 2. And this is a section through the site of the rear of the houses, looking north, showing the levels and how the properties would be partially set into the site again. This is 36A to the west here. The application is considered to represent a low density scheme that reflects the spatial pattern of the neighbouring development and the site's edge of settlement location. It's, as members will have noted in the report, we conclude that the site's not readily visible from any nearby public vantage points or in longer distance views, such as from the seafront. The impact on the landscape and the landscape designations of the AONB is considered minimal due to the existing development that surrounds the site, topography of the site, the design of the buildings, which are partially set into the ground, and the proposed landscaping, as well as the existing landscaping. And the scheme would not cause any significant harm to the special landscape qualities. It's considered that all the other material considerations relating to the design, the layout, the highways, amenity of existing and the future occupiers, ecology and drainage are all satisfactory, and it's considered that the scheme would be acceptable with regard to local and national planning policy, which has prompted officers to recommend the application for approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. Thank you for that. We have 2 speakers, the first being James Kirby, local resident, to speak against the application. Over to you, Committee Services.
Thank you, Chairman. Rob, can you just stop sharing your screen for a moment?
Oh, apologies.
I've got a video. Thank you.
I live at Hillwood House. We overlook the single unmade road abutted by ragstone walls, providing access to the site. and we have a right of way on foot. I speak on behalf of a number of my neighbours as well who share these concerns. The access to the site on construction. No vehicles can pass each other. There is potential damage to the walls and no adequate parking for workmen or delivery vehicles. Lorries will have to reverse blind onto Black House Hill. The potential is alarming. Please look at the photos lodged which explain the problems. Access must be across the meadowland from Black House Rise. At present, all the land, including the meadowland, is under the ownership control of the executors of the late Bridget Mary White. I refer to Mr. and Mrs. Naylor's points about imposing a condition for an extensive construction management plan designed to facilitate responsible construction and minimise nuisance and inconvenience to neighbours. There is no comment on this in the report. It is a serious omission. We urge the committee to support such a plan. Post-construction, access condition is poor at its junction with Black House Hill. We are surprised the applicant considers it is appropriate. We are disappointed with the Highway Authority regarding their ambivalence as to the safety risk of the junction. We wonder if the Highways Authority is aware of the current traffic volumes and speeds or of the future plans for development. Black House Hill requires closer attention than it appears to be getting to such, given this and other developments likely to come forward. The design and size of the proposed properties. The properties themselves are sympathetic and high quality, but there is considerable concern as to the height of the proposed garages, and their revised proximity will take considerable light from the neighbouring gardens and would be unreasonably overbearing, and in size are in stark contrast to the Lich Gate. The history and the environment. Please read the letters from the Civic Society and the neighbours. Despite the site not being listed, it is of local significance. Its features and settings must be most sympathetically respected. There are positives in the application, but with further developments on the adjoining site in the pipeline, the site would be at risk without placing safeguards. Finally, I repeat, access and egress with safety is vital, and building works carried out with minimum inconvenience very important. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kirby. Our second speaker is Elizabeth Welch, the agent to speak on the application. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for the opportunity to address the meeting. I speak in support of the application on behalf of the applicant, namely the executor of Bridget Mary White. We are pleased that your officers are supporting this scheme and recommending planning permission be granted. From the outset, we have worked with your officers to agree this scheme. We have sought to respond to officer comments, and we have also listened to local residents. We note that Mr. Kirby, who has spoken objecting to the scheme, has concerns over the proposed access to the dwellings. KCC Highways have been consulted on the scheme and do not raise any concerns since the access is private. We would like to give assurance to Mr. Kirby and other neighbours that the proposal is only for 2 dwellings and that we have no intention for further development to be reached by this access. We would be willing to accept a condition to restrict any increase in dwelling numbers on the application site above the 2 units being sought as part of this application, and would like to reassure the neighbours and planning committee that there is no intention to use this access to serve any adjoining land. We hope that members will share the view of the planning officer to recognise that this is a well-prepared scheme that will result in a high-quality development of just 2 units, and hope planning permission will be granted accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you, Gemma. Councillors, I have one councillor, Councillor Wimble, indicated to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I personally think it's a very nice design. I like the layouts of the buildings. I don't think that they have any issues with street scene when you compare to the multi-layers of the other buildings around the site. The plan clearly showed that you will be able to drive up into the property and then almost do a 3-point turn so you're not reversing back onto the main road. I'm sure if KCC Highways had any issues with it, they normally never hold back in coming forward with those. There was some concern raised by the first speaker about the views from the neighbouring dwellings, but from the pictures there and from the plans, there seems to be good tree cover either side. I think it's quite sympathetic. As I say, good vegetation cover as well, and the fact that it's been dug into the hillside from the road, it appears, or from behind, it appears that they would just look like bungalows anyway. I get the first speaker's concerns about further dwellings. As you heard from the developer, the developer's agent, they don't have any plans to do so and are prepared to put that into their conditions as well. But we have to remember that all planning should be judged on its own merit anyway. So I'm more than happy to go with the officer's recommendation, and would like to propose that we accept this application.
And Councilwoman, do you have a seconder? Seconder, Councillor Hollingsby?
I didn't put my mute button on, and I'd like to speak if I may. Sorry.
Yeah, I've got Councillor Jim Martin, then I should go to you, Councillor Hollingsby.
Thank you.
And so that was seconded, Councillor Hollingsby, yeah?
Yes.
Yeah, excellent. Councillor Jim Martin.
Thank you very much, Chair. This it's my ward, so this has I've had a lot of emails regarding this, and generally the feeling is that development on these sites is almost inevitable. But what local residents are concerned about is, quite rightly, the fragility of that immediate environment in terms of the trees, the green stuff, etc., but also the ragstone walls. Very, very, very difficult. You'll know, Chair, how difficult it is to rebuild a ragstone wall if it gets damaged. Also concerns about the development respecting the heritage in terms of heights of garages, things like this. But essentially, Chair, I feel all of these can be resolved if the applicant agrees to produce a detailed construction management plan. I think that's really been the bane of the local residents' concerns. Is it's all of the practicalities about how it's going to be done, not what is going to be done, if you see what I mean. So I would ask Llewellyn Lloyd and other members of the team just to take a look at that, because I think a lot of people's fears could be allayed if we can get into the detail about how the construction process is going to take place, with protection for the ragstone walls and some discussion about the heights and the heritage of the existing structures. Thank you very much, Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Martin. Mr. Allen already messaged me actually saying about construction management, and Llewellyn's going to deal with that now before I go to Councillor Hollingsby. Thank you, Llewellyn.
Thank you, Chairman. Officers would have no objections to imposing a condition regarding construction management. I think the recommendation includes delegation to myself to add any further conditions as we feel necessary, so we can add that to the recommendation if that's how the decision goes.
Lovely. Thank you for that, Llewellyn. Councillor Hollingsby.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, actually, that covers really what I was going to say. I was going to say that I'm sure there could be a condition added on construction arrangements, because it seemed to me from the first speaker that was his main issue. I believe that it's a large plot. I think these two dwellings fit in there comfortably. I was a bit concerned about the access, but from what I've read, it seems as though highways have got no issues, and therefore it would be very difficult to turn something down because of the access when highways are not making any comment. And the other thing I would say, which I think Councillor Wimble did say, is that every application has to be judged on its own merits. We can't just make a decision on what might happen in the future in terms of further development on adjoining land. So I'm happy to second the application.
Thank you, Councillor Hollingsby, and you're correct in saying, I think every member said it tonight, we've obviously got to judge what's in front of us tonight. You know, I was pleased to see Hive Town Council obviously supported this as well, which is excellent as well. So, and you know, going through the report, it does tick, you know, 99.9% of the boxes, and they are very nice, you know, properties as well. Councillor Mead.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, fine, yeah.
Lovely, thank you. I'm just concerned about a couple of bits. When we look at the fact that we're in the Kent Downs area of outstanding natural beauty, the management plan under SD3 says new development or changes to land use will be opposed when contrary to the need to conserve and enhance the natural beauty of the Kent Downs area of outstanding natural beauty. I think my main concern is that there are obviously a lot of houses in areas of outstanding natural beauty with large gardens, and they'd all like to build on them because obviously that will bring in extra money and it will affect the character of the area. I'm sorry, there's no doubt about that. There are concerns about the height of garages. So I'm always very concerned when we look at building in these areas. It's interesting also that this particular site, I'm guessing it was a big garden, has never been developed before. And maybe the officers can tell me why the local archaeological society weren't asked to comment on this, because I believe that there is history in the area. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Allen, do you want to look at that? Or
Thank you, Chair. Yes, in terms of the archaeology, I'm just trying to recall now. I think it's beneath the threshold for consulting with KCC archaeology. If I can just check my notes. And in terms of local archaeology, let me have a quick check. Yeah, I believe it's actually beneath the threshold for consultation with KCC archaeology, and they've when updating the archaeological notification areas, they've put a threshold because obviously they get a lot, and it's quite an interesting county we live in, full stop. And you know, I've tested this with the speaking to KCC previously, and said, you know, if it's beneath a major application, would you still like to know? Because obviously there's groundworks, there's potential to affect buried or unknown archaeological sort of remains, and they've reiterated and said, no, we don't. It's beneath the threshold. We sensitivity test areas in terms of what's surrounding them and how near they are to other known issues and areas of activity. That so in terms of this application, we did not seek the views of KCC archaeology on that, and we wouldn't normally consult because they're not a statutory consultee, sort of a local archaeology group. I have read, you know, some of the I've read all of the neighbour letters that have sort of it talked about the history of the site, and did some research myself actually, because it was actually quite interesting. But yeah, as members have made a point previously, it's not a listed structure. It's not in a conservation area, and so yeah, I feel we've covered everything in that respect.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. Councillor Trelaw.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I was just sort of waiting to hear everyone's views really, because I do appreciate that this is in the settlement boundary, and there doesn't seem to be like huge opposition by neighbours, but as Councillor Mead just pointed out, it is in that AONB, and this gradually infilling of these spaces in the AONB does have an impact, even if there might not be any public vantage points, and especially when that's teamed with the development of gardens, you know. So for me, it's those two things combined. It's in the AONB where you know, where it's the development of a residential garden. You know, there are other concerns. I have long-term concerns, even with ecological mitigation efforts like the bat roosts. You know, in the long term, it is this added pressure on the site. It does squeeze out nature, and yeah, I'm not quite sure it's sort of on the balance for me, but yeah, those things are quite significant in my mind. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Treloar. Councillor Philip Martin. Philip Martin, sorry.
Thank you, Chairman. Now, as has been mentioned, and is mentioned at most of our meetings, we do have to take these on their individual applications on their own merit. What I and several would-be developers are concerned about is the inconsistency of the policy more than anything else. Now, two of my fellow councillors have referred to the fact that it's in an AONB area, and I raised a question some time ago, and I've still not had an answer, in as much as can development, an application for development in an AONB area be turned down solely on that reason? Well, I've got my answer tonight, because clearly it can't. So it's really more of an observation, but I think that this is something that we need to perhaps revisit. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Martin. No other councillor indicating to speak. We have one proposed by Councillor Wimble, seconded by Councillor Hollingsby, to go over the officer's recommendation. Over to you, Mr. Mills.
Thank you, Chairman. Take the roll call now. Councillor Brooke.
For.
Councillor Collier.
For.
Councillor Fuller.
Against.
Councillor Goddard.
For.
Councillor Mrs. Hollingsby.
For.
Councillor Keane.
Against.
Councillor Jim Martin.
For.
Councillor Philip Martin.
For.
Councillor Mead.
Against.
Councillor Mayers.
Against.
Councillor Treloar.
Against.
Councillor Wimble.
For.
Chairman, that is 7 for and 5 against.
Thank you, Mr. Mills. That's approved. Thank you, councillors. Before I move on to the next application, I skipped item 4, which was the minutes of the licensing subcommittee, which was held on the 6th of April, councillors. So are those minutes agreed? Excellent, thank you very much, and my apologies for that. I was Mr. Speedy tonight. Moving on to 200684FH, the Rectory Lane, Lyminge, Folkestone, and Mr. Lloyd's going to take us through this. Good evening, Mr. Lloyd.
Good evening, Chairman. Thank you very much, and good evening, councillors. You'll have to bear with me. The case officer is on paternity leave tonight, so I am stepping into the breach. So bear with. This is an application for a new dwelling in the garden of the Rectory, which lies along the southern boundary of Lyminge. The site is located in the AONB, adjacent to a footpath that runs down Rectory Lane and to the south into open countryside. And the application site can be seen in front of you, edged in red. And my presentation is not working, of course. Can you still see that? This is the application site itself. Edged in red, you can see the Rectory with its detached garage and its garden to the east and south, and its sort of service area to the front, with Dolphin Cottage to the north. The application site directly would be within the sort of southern portion of the garden there, edged in the red circle, facing onto open countryside and visible from the public right-of-way as one walks northward into the village of Lyminge. For members' reference, the red line in front of you is the settlement boundary as defined by the local plan. So this site is within the built confines of the village of Lyminge and is therefore acceptable in terms of the principle of new residential development in this location. This is a series of photographs walking up Rectory Lane, starting.
Chairman, can I just say, I don't know if anybody else, but I can only see the very first slide that you showed, Llewellyn.
Oh,
myself as well.
Let's resume, shall we? I seem to be having some technical difficulties. Is that working?
No, it's not moved yet. Apologies, Llewellyn. Yes, it is now.
Okay,
That's
sorry.
a new picture.
Let's see if this continues to work. We'll try a different way. So this is the application site edged in red with the rectory in the middle and the small detached garage to the south of it. It's garden to the east and to the south. The red circle indicates the area for the new dwelling, set to the south of the rectory to be accessed off Rectory Lane and the private drive that currently serves the rectory. For members' reference, the red line in front on this diagram is the settlement boundary of Lyminge, and it includes the garden area of the application site, which is currently the subject of the planning application. Therefore, the principle of new residential development subject to design considerations and highway safety is acceptable in planning terms. These pictures are the views moving southwards along Rectory Lane, starting at the top left, the chalet bungalow with black weatherboarding and a slate roof, moving further south to the image bottom left towards the rectory. And then I think Ross has put in the bottom right is moving through the rectory's grounds out towards the AONB beyond. And that's sort of a wider panned angle of the rectory and how it sits next to its neighbour, and where the garage is shown would be the area for the new dwelling. And this is the site plan for proposals with a second new garage proposed to service the rectory to ensure that there's retained parking availability for the existing dwelling. The new garage sitting along its new southern boundary, and then the proposed 4-bedroom, 2-storey house in the southern portion of the garden. For reference, I'm sure you're all familiar with these now. These are the elevations of the building with a brick base course, timber cladding at first with a tiled roof, and the floor plans, which is just setting out how the 4-bedroom dwelling would be set. And that's all from me. Thank you, Chairman.
Lovely. Thank you, Mr. Lloyd. We have 2 speakers on this. First being Mr. K. Adura. Local residents speak against the application. Over to you, Committee Services. Thank you.
Thank you. A statement from Miss Kay Drury. She's a local resident and member of the parish church. I object to the proposed development as the land and current building on the site is for the use of the local village church, and this development is not for the purpose of enhancing the life and faith of the local church. Another building so close to the rectory will interfere with the access to spiritual support that would be provided to residents of the village, and any land sold on for private development would be lost to the benefit of the local community. The local church has already lost the use of the church hall, which was sold for private development in the past. This was in the same road as the rectory. The site is also in an area of outstanding natural beauty. Other objections include the importance of the local area as a site of archaeological significance. Lyminge in Kent is a rare and important archaeological site. 1300 years ago, an Anglo-Saxon monastery stood in the village of Lyminge, presided over by a royal abbess. Excavations are now showing that Lyminge was an important place before this, with Anglo-Saxon occupation extending back into the 5th century AD. Archaeologists from the University of Reading, along with local volunteers, archaeological societies and students have been working here from 2010 to 2019 to uncover Lyminge Anglo-Saxon past. Most recently, in 2019, the archaeologists from Reading, Dr. Gabor and colleagues, were working in the churchyard. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kate. Our second speaker is Councillor Roger Joyce on behalf of Lyminge Parish Council to speak on the application. Thank you.
So that's a video, so I'll just prepare that.
Good evening, councillors, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to address you on behalf of the Lyminge Parish Council in respect of this application. Firstly, I must apologise for sending you a round robin on this subject yesterday, but I do hope my explanation of why I did that was acceptable to you and that you have read the documents that I asked you to read. Lyminge is accepting through the local plan a total of 68 new houses in the whole of the parish, 30 of which will be in the village itself, very close to this site, 38 in neighbouring Etching Hill. And although windfall sites are a feature of the local plan, this edge of village infill is not necessary, nor is it welcomed by residents who we represent. This site is on the edge of the village. It's almost in an open countryside, and it does not comply with paragraph 172 of the MPPF or the advice in the ANOB design guidance. We note, by the way, that the ANOB unit do not seem to have been consulted. This development does not conserve or enhance the ANOB in any way. And the historic and archaeological importance of Lyminge as an early Anglo-Saxon settlement can't be overstated. And recent finds post-dating this application on land very close, metres away from this site, next to Broad Street House, only go to emphasise that importance. They're still being written up. A full archaeological condition must be applied to any decision, any application, practically anywhere in Lyminge, but particularly on this site. So this development will be highly visible from the public footpath and from Canterbury Road, and will involve the loss of substantial tree cover if permitted. So councillors, please, we urge you to discuss this matter very seriously, and if you are minded to, please refuse the application. Many thanks.
Many thanks. Thank you, Councillor Joyce. Councillors, I have Councillor Wimble. Councillor Wimble.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Once again, yeah, could be potentially quite controversial, this, but I noticed that it is within the settlement boundary. Our officers are paid pretty well to do due diligence on what can and can't be proposed. I don't think they would have been doing their job if they hadn't have looked into all these things. There was all kinds of mentions there about how it will be seen, and it would be the tree covers. I just honestly don't see, if it's within the settlement boundary, how one more house would not make a difference. We're told all the time about our responsibility as a council, that we have to build these houses. If you said no to every house that was built, as a council, we're going to be in a lot of trouble very soon. Lots of people don't like something built in their back garden. I know that more than anybody. We've got hundreds of houses being built here in New Romney. There comes a time where there's a right place and a wrong place. It's within the settlement boundary. It's not, I know it's not like someone's building a great big 15-bedroom mansion. It's a reasonable sized dwelling. And again, I know there's certain people on this committee that will look at things. The consultations about the wildlife and whether it's an area or a site of historic interest would surely have been looked into by our officers anyway. So I would like to suggest that we, I don't know if I went off then. I had something come up on my screen. I'd like to again propose that we go with the officer's recommendation on this one.
And Councillor Wimble, do you have?
I'd be happy to second, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Martin, and it's Councillor Treloar to speak next.
Thank you, Chair. Similar to the last one, but I think even more strikingly so in this, as it is right on the edge of the boundary, and whilst it is in the settlement boundary is also right there on the edge of the AONB, and it is encroachment on it. And we know that the AONB does have very, very strong standing in our planning decisions. That's laid out very clearly. And you know, it's up to each of us to decide on what weighting you know, we give that. So and I certainly think in this instance I give it a great deal of weighting. It is that gradual death by 1,000 cuts as we encroach on the countryside. Thank you.
And Councillor Trelaw, and now going on to Councillor Jim Martin.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, during the last discussion, Councillor Philip Martin raised a historic point from a couple of meetings ago. And so I was wondering if the head of planning could give us some guidance here, because I agree with Councillor Martin that there is inconsistency. We refuse applications because they're in the AONB. We accept applications even though they're in the AONB. Now, I realise that it's not the only matter that we have to take into account, but certainly I would be keen on some guidance. Although, as Councillor Trelaw says, this is within the settlement boundary. I mean, it is dangling on the end of it. And, death by 1,000 cuts, I completely agree. So while I was happy to, err on the recommendations from the councillors, from the planning officers, sorry, I'm not so sure on this one. But that is the point of having councillors, is to discuss these matters. If we were, good as they are, as Councillor Brooke explained to me a good few months ago, if all we did was follow the officers' recommendations, they wouldn't need us at all. And where would we be then? So thank you, Chair. I would appreciate some guidance if we could have some.
Yeah, no worries. I'm going to bring Llewellyn in now, and hopefully he'll be able to update us. Thank you, Llewellyn.
Thank you, Chairman, and I will try, councillors. The AONB is one of many material considerations, and the government's advice in the NPPF is clear that there's no principal objection to developing in the AONB. But when considering development in the AONB, we need to consider whether that development is in the right place in the first place, i.e. is it in a settlement where development is identified, and then is the quality acceptable given the impact it would have on the landscape. So in an isolated location, outside in the countryside, the impact on the AONB might have greater weight than, say, the village, which is in the AONB. What I would say on this application is the AONB unit were consulted and chose not to comment on the application. They were consulted back in June of 2020 on this application and decided to make no comments on the impact of this development on the AONB. Officers have weighed the impact of the development on the AONB, and against that have weighed that the development plan as raised by Lyminge Parish Council relies on a certain degree of infill, that this site is within the settlement boundary and therefore an area where this council has accepted in principle new development can come forward without having to justify its position there. And so the considerations come down to whether we are happy with what is being proposed in this location, how does it look, and does it respect the character of the area? And in this case, officers have deemed, in their opinion, that the development is high quality development that would not harm the intrinsic character and appearance of the countryside. It's not resulting in an increase of the village envelope. It's not sporadic development in the countryside. It's in a settlement identified for new development, and the design is considered acceptable. On that basis, we have recommended to members approval. I hope that helps.
Yeah, thank you, Llewellyn. I think that clears up the, I see many members nodding there, and clears up the ANLB issue. And thank you again for that, Llewellyn. Moving on, I've got Councillor Mead, Councillor Hollingsby, Councillor Keane. So Councillor Mead.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, but I do bring up the fact that as councillors, we're in a very privileged position, especially when we're on the planning committee, and part of our responsibility should be to protect our environment and our countryside for the enjoyment of all. I take on board, obviously, what our Chief Planning Officer says, and the officer's recommendation. However, the very fact that this garage and this new building can be seen from the footpath, which obviously is a public right of way, cannot surely enhance the area of standing natural beauty. And I refer you back to the policy I mentioned earlier, which I believe off the top of my head was SD3. So I'm afraid I cannot support this one again, especially as the council pointed out very rightly that this isn't needed accommodation because they already have places that have been gone or are currently going through application for 38 and 60 other houses in the area. So there is no need to encroach right on the edge of the village in an area of outstanding natural beauty. Thank you.
Councillor Mead. Councillor Hollinsby.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I was going to try and explain about the AONB, but obviously I wouldn't be able to do it like Llewellyn's just done. This is quite a difficult one for me because it is part of my ward, and obviously I understand the parish council's views, and I've read the some of the letters that have been objections, but I'm finding it extremely difficult as to the reasons. Sorry, I lost my screen then. As to the reasons why we could turn this down. I mean, one of the advantages, I think, for me, is that the foul drainage does not go into the Stour. Now, I think that's going to be a major issue for further development in the North Downs, and in this case, it doesn't actually happen. So I think in some ways we ought to welcome this because other development may not be able to take place. And I know people will say development shouldn't, but at the end of the day, as a district, we all know that we've got to find a number of houses, over 737 houses per year. And if we don't do that, and if we don't do it where we think it's appropriate, then we have to, what will happen is that the government will say that and give planning permission to developers wherever they want to be. So I think this application in the village boundary, in a garden where I can't personally see that there's going to be a disadvantage to the rest of the village. Now, I did understand the first speaker, I think, spoke about the area of the vicarage being available for church use. Well, according to the report, and I'd be interested to know whether that's right, that it is private gardens and it's not available. Maybe it has been, but as a private garden, is it for church use? I mean, I know the church very well at Lyminge. I know a number of people there, and I obviously know the vicar extremely well. It is a difficult one for me, but I can't actually find a reason for turning it down. I mean, the archaeological, they've made no comments apart from having a condition. Obviously, there needs to be a condition in terms of the archaeological issue, but otherwise, I am finding it quite difficult as to what policies we could use to turn this application down.
Thank you, Councillor Hollinsby. I've got 4 more speakers. Before I go to them, I'm going to bring Llewellyn back in. Llewellyn.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to quickly touch on the issue of need and having to demonstrate a need for a house in this location. Just to circle back, the development plan has identified within the boundary of Lyminge, new infill development is acceptable in principle, and there is no requirement on applicants to demonstrate a need for a new house in this location. That's kind of the first point. But secondary to that, part of that process is that as officers and the council, we have said that not only are we allocating development in settlements, we are expecting windfall sites to happen naturally. and they might come forward over and above that of which we're expecting, which would be obviously helpful to our housing numbers. But I think the question of need is not really a matter for consideration this evening. Just to quickly touch on that.
Thank you, Llewellyn. Thank you for that. Helpful. Councillor Keane.
Thank you, Chair. Going back to what my colleagues have said, and thank you, Llewellyn, for explaining better to me AONB. But my concern is that we're just letting more and more being built in this kind of area. And as Councillor Trelaw says, is this going to be another, you know, is this a cut? Is this a further cut? Is this a further cut to our beautiful countryside? And you're saying it's in keeping, and what I'm seeing, I don't feel is in keeping. But you know, I'll bow to your knowledge on that. But I'm just concerned. We're developing a lot of houses in this area, in lots of different sites. You know, Otterpool, we've got Prince's Parade, likely to be Ship Street. Do we really need to build in this area when we've got all those developments coming along? Will we not meet our targets with those developments?
Thank you, Councillor Keane. Councillor Trelaw.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it just occurred to me something else I wanted to say about the importance and significance of the AONB. It is in fact part of a Interreg funded, or the team and the area, part of a joint Interreg funded partnership project, which is working towards having the area along, you know, with others, becoming a UNESCO World Heritage Site. So that's the level of significance of this area. It's not just some nice countryside in our backyard. It's got high value, and I just wanted to raise that, just to say that that's actually sort of, you know, in the pipeline over the next couple of years, which I think really does signify how important it is. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Trelaw. I've got Councillor Fuller, then I'm going to Councillor Wimble. Councillor Fuller.
Sorry about that. Took a moment there, Chair. Yeah, I think, as with the previous plan, my issue is that it's built in the area of outstanding natural beauty, and in particular that it's on a site that may well have archaeological features that are worthy of preservation. I think, from memory, that on that basis it contravenes policy NE3, and so I personally will be opposing it. And I hope that other councillors will consider doing so as well, because I think this is death by a thousand cuts. And while I take the point that it is on the very edge of the settlement boundary, it's semantics for me. It might be accurate semantics, but semantics nevertheless. So yeah, I don't think I can support this at all. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fuller. Councillor Wimble and Councillor Hollinsby. Councillor Wimble.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple of things I wanted to point out that I was going to do the first time around, but because my screen went blank, I wasn't even sure if I was coming across. The first speaker mentioned about church land. I think we all know the Church of England on its own has got over 2,000 acres that they're making available to building across the country because they desperately need the money. The church, I'm sure, would not have allowed this site to go forward if there wasn't a need maybe for the local church, and the money that this plot would do a lot of good for the local diocese. We all went, or most of us did 2 training sessions on planning. I can say that if this was outside the boundary of the area of outstanding natural beauty, I would have opposed it. But it's not. We have rules and regulations for a reason. I just think, you know, we've Councillor Keane said, haven't we got enough houses with Otterpool and Prince's Parade? Actually, no, we don't at the moment, not to meet our recommendation. New Romney, for example, like I say, has got hundreds of houses and looks like it could possibly have another 400 or 500 houses added to it in the next 5 years. You've got to stick to rules and regulations for a reason, because otherwise it becomes a very unsafe judgment. Unless you can really clearly justify why this has gone against our own recommendations for planning, the applicant would just appeal against it. It will cost not only the applicant more money and possibly costs against the council, but I just honestly think that, you know, this is within the area of outstanding natural beauty. If it was the other side of the border, then it would be a lot clearer. You could say no without really having to give much reason other than to use that. But the church is happy to sell the land. So I stick by my original motion that this should be passed. And I find it very hard to understand why some of the councillors are going against this recommendation, being outside or inside the settlement boundary. So I can't see how we can't accept it.
Thank you, Councillor Wimble. I've got Councillor Hollingsby, then I shall go to the vote, councillors. Councillor Hollingsby.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I was just going to say, nobody doubts the interest, the archaeological interest of Lyminge. I've certainly supported projects with my ward grant. I certainly don't do that. But what I'm weighing up in is if another house was put forward, another application was put forward outside of the village boundary, we would have a reason to turn that down. But we may not have a reason to turn that down if we're turning every other application down. And so I think it seems to me a very sensible way forward. And I appreciate the comments of Lyminge Parish Council and local residents, some of the local residents. But I do feel that this seems to me to be an ideal place for a house within the settlement boundary, rather perhaps than accepting applications outside of that settlement boundary, which we may have to do. As Councillor Wimble said, we are not meeting our targets at the present moment.
Thank you for that, Councillor Hollingsby. Thank you, councillors. We've got one proposal, proposed by Councillor Wimble and seconded by Philip Martin, to go with the officer's recommendation. Over to you, Mr. Mills.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Brooke.
For.
Councillor Collier.
For.
Councillor Fuller.
Against.
Councillor Goddard.
For.
Councillor Hollingsby.
For.
Councillor Keane.
Against.
Councillor Jim Martin.
Against.
Councillor Philip Martin.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Mead.
Against.
Councillor Mayers.
Against.
Councillor Trelaw.
Against.
And Councillor Wimble.
For.
Chairman, I make that 6-4 with 6 against.
Thank you, Mr. Mills. Obviously, I'll stick with my proposal, my vote, sorry, and go with the officer's recommendation. Thank you. Again, moving on, councillors. 201596 FH, Manor Barn, Tandersleys Road, Etchin Hill. And Miss Patchin is going to take us through it. Good evening, Miss Patchin.
Good evening. I shall just get the presentation up for you. Okay, so This is a retrospective application for the existing dwelling on the site and the existing stable block and machinery hay store building, together with installation of replacement lamp standards. Due to the complex planning history and unusual circumstances of the application, I intend to focus my presentation on how the current situation has arisen in terms of the planning history and the relevant material planning considerations. As members will be aware from the committee report, the application site was previously in the same ownership of the neighbouring dwelling Rivendell, which was formerly Green Loaming. And I should just show you, apologies for the poor site plan, I'll move on to this one. So this is the application site here. Etching Hill is to the west and Paddlesworth is to the east. And the site contains this is the dwelling, this is the machinery store in question, that's the stable block, and this large building here is the indoor riding arena that's been on the site a considerable number of years and isn't subject to the planning application. So you can see a bit more clearer here. This is shows it, the plan's the other way around. So this is the neighbouring property here. You've got the stables, the machine store, the dwelling, and the riding arena. So to go back to 1996, planning permission was granted for a first floor addition to an existing stable block to provide residential accommodation on the upper floor. So you can see from the plans that this would have provided a 3-bedroom self-contained dwelling over the stables. In 2000, following the separation of the site from Green Loaming, planning permission was granted for a 2-storey building containing stables and a dwelling to replace the existing stable block. So this is the floor plan of the building that was granted there at that time, and you can see again it's a 3-bedroom dwelling. You've got the stables here. To the rear on the ground floor was the living accommodation, and then there was further living accommodation on the first floor. So this again was essentially a 3-bedroom dwelling. And this was the elevation plan that was approved, which is very similar in overall design and form to what is now on the site. With the exception of the stable doors at the front end, the general layout of the fenestration with some changes is as has been constructed, similar design, barn conversion style dwelling building on the site. I would draw members' attention at this stage to the balcony that was approved at that time on the south elevation here, and to the 2 roof lights on the western elevation, and this is the elevation facing Rivendell. I'm drawing members' attention to those at this point because concern has been raised in representation about overlooking a loss of privacy in terms of the balcony and roof lights as they are now, which are different to what was approved then. But in all other respects, externally, the building then is what has been built on the site. That planning permission was subject to conditions removing permitted development rights for classes A to E, and that is alterations and extensions to dwellings, and also to a condition that the occupation of the dwelling, and the conditions says dwelling, be limited to person involved with the stabling or training of horses in the stables forming part of the building and adjacent arenas or their dependents. The crucial part of this condition to note is there was no, or part of the decision to notice that there was no condition requiring the stables to be retained. So it required the occupation, but it didn't actually require the stables to be retained on site within the building. So following the construction of the building, the stables could then subsequently have been removed and the residential accommodation extended into that space. And there was no planning condition or other planning control that could have prevented that from happening. Following that permission, there were subsequently 3 applications for a dwelling on the site, again a similar design but without the stables, and these were refused. And then in 2012, an application was submitted to vary the materials condition on this 2000 planning permission. And the grant of that resulted in a new planning permission. It resulted in the grant of a new planning permission because it was a variation of condition, essentially under section 73 of the Act, which means we have to it's granting a new planning permission. And this is the floor plan of that building. So it's the same floor plan as was submitted under the previous application that was approved. So there are no changes to the floor plan. Again, it's a 3-bedroom unit. And these are the elevations that were approved. Oh, there. So the planning permission was granted, and that also included a condition removing the same permitted development rights and the same condition relating to occupancy. And there was also on that planning permission a condition requiring the development to be carried out in accordance with the submitted plans, and that the internal layout of the building be constructed in accordance with the approved plans, and the relevant plan numbers were included in that condition. And members will note very similar design. It's basically all they were changing with the materials. So the floor plan that was submitted was the same, design of the building was the same. It was essentially a change to the materials, a change to this window here, and the balcony was shown along the full length of the glazing on the south elevation. Now, again, crucially, the wording and the conditions did not require the stable accommodation or the internal layout to be retained once it's been constructed. The conditions only relate to the implementation of the planning permission and their construction. And this is a very unfortunate but important omission in respect of what members are now being asked to consider today, which is a dwelling without any stables internally. That's the only difference. So to summarise, planning permissions have previously been granted for a dwelling on several occasions on the site, which, although was approved with integral stables, none of the permissions included any mechanism for requiring stables to be retained once the building was constructed. As the planning permission, the last planning permission that was granted included a condition removing permitted development rights for external alterations, any changes to the external appearance to what was approved would have required planning permission. But internal alterations to dwellings do not constitute development and therefore do not require planning permission. So the additional, some of the changes that they see on the current plans of what's now been applied for and what's been constructed would not have required planning permission. So I just draw your attention back to the balcony. With regard to the balcony, it's shown the full length of the glazed area here, but it's not clear from these plans whether or not it was intended to be Juliet balcony or actually extend out. It appears not from the floor plans, but looking on the elevation plans, there is a reference to an opaque screen, which would indicate that there must have been a balcony platform extending out from the side elevation, the rear elevation of the dwelling to put the screen on. So these are the plans of the dwelling which has been constructed and for which planning permission has been sought. And this was the stable area under the previous approved plans, and this is now a living room. So internally, the only significant changes or differences to the previously approved plans are the omission of the stables and the additional floor of accommodation in the roof space. But had the dwelling been constructed in accordance with the approved plans previously, this floor could have been inserted anyway without requiring any planning permission, because it's not development to add an additional floor inside the dwelling. So again, with regard to the stables, as there'd been no condition on the previous planning permission requiring the stables to be retained, had the building been constructed with stables and then them converted to living accommodation afterwards, there would have been nothing under planning legislation or the planning permission to prevent this from being taken place, or for the authority, the local planning authority, to take any action. Externally, the changes from the previously approved plans are the additional roof lights in the east and west elevation. The east elevation overlooks towards the riding arena, and so therefore there are no issues in terms of impact on neighbouring residents from these additional windows. On the western elevation, this is the elevation facing Rivendell, and concerns have been raised in representations with regard to loss of privacy from the additional roof lights and balcony. The separation distances between Manor Barn and the neighbouring property Rivendell are set out in paragraph 7.10 of the officer's report, together with the reasons why it is not considered that there is an unacceptable level of overlooking resulting from the additional windows or from the balcony. The other elements of the application, I'll just take you through the photographs first. So this is the front elevation. So this is the elevation that would be facing towards the road. This is the side elevation facing into the application site. And you can see that the replica car entrance there. This is the rear elevation with the narrow balcony, and you can see the roof of the neighbouring dwelling here and the boundary screening and the trees, which are covered by a tree preservation order. And there's another view of that side elevation. So moving on to the other buildings, this is the hay and machinery store, which was previously approved. So you can see the elevations here. And this on the approved plans was shown as open. And these are the plans as constructed, which show this glazed. This has been built in accordance with the approved plans, with the differences set out at paragraph 3.7 of the officer's report. And that's the differences externally and also with the accommodation being provided internally, which is all used in connection with the residential use and the stable use on the site. And these are the elevations. So this is the drive as you come in. So this is the front elevation. That's the rear elevation. And then moving on to the stable block. This is the stable block as approved. You see it's a U-shaped stable block. And as constructed, very similar design. And the differences between the two are set out at paragraph 3.9 of the officer's report. And there are a couple of photographs of the stable block. All the issues are set out in the report, and the application is recommended for approval for the reasons set out in the report. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Patchen. Excellent report. We have one speaker, Mr. Ian Cloak, local resident, to speak against the application. And can I just remind members to keep their cameras on at all times so the committee services know that we are here or you're there. So excellent. So over to you, committee services.
Thank you, Chairman. 3 previous unsuccessful attempts, latest a backdoor effort at obtaining permission for a substantial house with adjacent leisure facilities in the countryside with no justifiable reason. The Planning Services legal team has accepted from the evidence submitted there may be a case of deliberate concealment in respect of this dwelling. Principal issue is its location. Local plan policy as well as national planning policy state that new dwellings should not be permitted in the countryside outside the confines of the major principal urban areas, rural service centres or smaller rural settlements unless replacements for existing dwellings or special justification. Current application clearly contrary to policy. Permission granted in 2000 was for a small-scale element of residential accommodation with stables, ancillary to and linked to an existing equine use, main use on the site. Only reason planning permission was granted contrary to policies. Note renewal in 2005 refused. No unauthorised establishment residential use, as per the informatives on application Y09/0905/SH. Existing building, a 3-storey unrestricted residential dwelling, no existing essential private equine use requiring residential accommodation, circumstances entirely different to those in 2000. Evidence provided that the footprint of current dwelling and hay and machinery store greater than that granted in permission in 2000. Significant increase in habitable living space to that granted in such a rural and sensitive location. Dwellings must be modest in size and designed to have as minimal an impact upon the landscape and neighbours as possible. Larger dimensions plus additional features, e.g. extra roof lights on the west elevation and reintroduction of a balcony on the south elevation, overbearing and overlooking impacts which we should not have to tolerate in the countryside. Planning officer in 2000 insisted balcony be removed, stating, although acceptable in a built-up area, but in this rural area, any development which compromises the neighbours' privacy should not be tolerated. Human rights issues. The above words need to be considered carefully on many issues raised by this application and outlined in more detail in our letter dated the 3rd of January last and subsequent correspondence. In summary, we consider the proposals in this application totally unacceptable as they are contrary to both national and local plan policy with no special justifications or overriding reasons for granting permission and in many ways infringe on our human rights. On this basis, we respectfully request that this application be refused. Thank you.
Thank you, Gemma. Councillors? Any councillor indicating to speak? Councillor Wimble.
I thought somebody had beaten me to it on that one. I held back with my hand. Let's start with the last mention there about human rights. Yeah, human rights are very important. When you buy a property, I believe if you buy the property within reason, you've got a right to do what you want with your property. I've got a history of being against building on greenfield sites. However, this isn't a greenfield site, it's a brownfield site. What you do within the house, as the officer said, you can do what you like. You add another 10 bedrooms in there as long as they're within the right size. I was a little bit concerned about the dormer windows, but that doesn't seem to be too much of a problem. This seems to be a judgment more on technicalities. The other thing that I was a little bit concerned at, looking at the first things, was the balcony, that the planning permission was for a Juliet balcony, and you can see clearly on the plans there that it does protrude what looks like just about a metre and a half. But is that really? I think that's in keeping with a Kent barn design. If I'm really honest, I'm very jealous. I'd love to live in a house that looked like that. The human rights side of things, again, talking about the fact that the condition of use to the riding school, if the riding school ceased to be for whatever reason previous to this, then surely, you know, you can't, you have to renew things because the world changes. We all know the world changes. You know, we're not going to be building petrol stations in 30 years' time, are we? Some places have conditions of use for fuel tanks. You know, that will change. So I think they've gone about this the right way to get the planning permission in place, so it's above board. You could open up a whole minefield of planning legislation that I certainly, even though I've done all my planning courses, I wouldn't want to try and second guess over our professional planning officers. So one, I like it, and two, I think it's fit for purpose, fit for use. Yes, it is a beautiful big building that most of us would never be able to afford to buy, but if somebody has done that, they've done right by an old historic building and made it a beautiful building. So although it is retrospective, things have changed since the original planning permission. If the officers are happy with the not being a Juliet balcony and being a full balcony, it's a very minor thing. I think you'd actually probably do more damage to have to replace it. But I'm minded to go with the officer's recommendation, I think.
Is that a proposal, Councillor Wimble? Yep. Do you have a second? I heard a voice, but I didn't see you. Who was that? Councillor Philip Martin?
Yes.
Okay, lovely. And it's Councillor Mead to speak next.
Thank you, Chair. Well, isn't this the application that just keeps giving and giving? I couldn't believe my eyes when I saw the amount of applications that had been on this site. And I think what we have to remember is we are here to uphold conditions and agreements, confirmations and objections that have gone before. Specific conditions were put down on this site, which the owner of this site has chosen to ignore. We've got windows that were never allowed to be there. We've got balconies that aren't allowed to be there. We've got some form of hay building, which is supposed to be for machinery and agricultural, that, if I'm correct, has got a swimming pool in it. And not only that, they've glazed it across. So it's quite obvious that they're not actually using that for the agricultural use that it was actually given. We've also got, finally, some stables. But I would like to ask the officers, it was mentioned that there was a condition put with the original agreement for the residential property above the stables, even though they could get rid of the stables, that the person who lives in them or their relatives had to be involved with the school. And I'm wondering whether that is actually still in place and actually part of the conditions that are actually still down at the moment. Thank you.
And Councillor Mead, I'm going to bring Llewellyn in and hopefully it'll be clarified. Thank you, Llewellyn.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a quick one, councillors. The description of this development is retrospective condition for the building as built. Tonight's discussion is not about the principle of residential dwelling here. It's about the physical external appearance of the buildings that we now have on site. As Mrs. Patching has highlighted, these buildings have largely been approved for the uses that they are now being used for. We're talking about in terms of the dwelling, the balcony and the external windows, as opposed to whether it's a dwelling house. I'd have to defer to Mrs. Patching on the condition regarding the use for stables for that person, but I think We have examined this application at length. It has had a long gestation. It was granted by the planning committee some time ago, and it had subsequent permissions to that. At no point has the council through the LPA or the council through the committee tied the building and the land together through a legal agreement. As such, the land has been sold and subdivided, and the use to which it was originally granted has now disappeared and no longer exists. The knocking of two dwellings into one also does not require planning permission. It is the creation of one dwelling into two that does require planning permission. But we didn't grant two, we granted one dwelling with some ancillary accommodation at first floor with stables at ground, and that has been implemented in accordance with the approved plans, and then subsequently had further windows and a balcony put into it in the 2012 planning application. But maybe Lizette can answer the question about whether the original stable condition still, but I would doubt it, otherwise we would have raised it in the committee report.
Thank you, Llewellyn. Miss Patchen?
The condition that was on the last planning permission, which is what the applicant has essentially built but without the stables, required the occupation of the dwelling to be with the stabling or training of horses in the stables forming part of that building and adjacent arenas. Although the stables aren't part of the building, there are still stables on the site which have horses in them relating to the applicant. So there is still horses and stabling on the site, and they're in connection with the residential use.
Thank you.
Thank you, Miss Patchen. Councillor Jim Martin.
Thank you, Chair. I was going to ask the same question of that Councillor Mead did, because a lot of the neighbours' objections are alleging, residential development via a back door in terms of seeking this sort of agricultural employment concession in the original permission. So I am delighted, I have to say, that still exists. I don't know anything about this building. I don't know anything about the operation of this riding school, but I'm delighted that the condition still exists, and I hope that there'll be a mechanism that it can be enforced. But my main point really is this is a retrospective planning application, and however Councillor Wimble thinks it's an architecturally attractive building, that has nothing to do with the planning process. And I have to say my heart goes out to the local residents, in so much as they surely must expect some protection from the planning authority. I'd be really interested to know how this building got built in complete contravention to its existing permission. I know we can't go through everything, but I think that we owe the local community in this area, an obligation to monitor what gets built and to ensure that it is in line with with not only the conditions but the planning application. The coach and horses, or just the horses, have been run through this permission, and now we get a retrospective. And I understand all about that we can only judge a retrospective planning application on the basis of it being the planning application. But I have to say I have huge sympathy for the local residents who feel that this is residential development via a back door. Thank you.
And Councillor Martin. Councillor Hollinsworth.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I was just going to ask that, so the condition that it goes with stables and associated horse as a private residence. Does that carry on? So if that property is sold, does that condition remain with it? That's my first question. And then I was just, I mean, it is a long, complicated case, this is, but I thought at one point Lisette said, well, it's as simple as this. It's the external appearance is just the balcony and the roof lights. Now, if that's the case, then I can't see that there's an issue. And I'm just wondering, have I simplified it too much? I mean, 7.7 talks about the principle of the dwelling on the site has been established. And I thought that that paragraph is pretty self-explanatory, 7.7. And just while I'm speaking, my only other issue was on the Japanese knotweed. And I think it does say that there is a report to be submitted, but I was just be interested in Lizette's comments on that Japanese knotweed, because that's quite an important issue as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you, Councillor Hollingsby. Before I go back to Miss Patchin, Llewellyn wants to come in. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to clarify, Councillor Hollingsby, as the paragraph around principle of development establishes, this hasn't been a dwelling established by stealth. The council has approved a dwelling on this site twice, once at committee and once under delegated authority for the design that's now in front of you. And the question we have is whether the balcony as proposed without any screening to its side is acceptable, and whether the additional roof lights in the roof form are also acceptable. But the principle of residential dwelling here has been established through 2 planning permissions, lawfully so. What we have, unfortunately, is that part of that building was to be used for stabling, but at the time of granting the original planning permission and the subsequent one, the council did not require those stables to be retained in perpetuity, thus meaning that they could be converted into anything as long as it was part of the dwelling house. An example of that would be people with an attached garage to their house. They can convert that into living accommodation unless we have a condition on saying it shall be retained as parking. That is sort of the nub of the issue before us. In answer to your earlier question, Councillor Hollingsby, yes, the condition would remain in place, requiring the stabling and the dwelling to remain related to it and the occupation until it's removed, and the council would have to grant that removal.
Thank you. I think that sets it out very well, Llewellyn. Thank you.
Can I just answer the other point as well? I mean, just to go back on the conditions, if members agree with the officer recommendation and resolve to grant planning permission, then this would be a new planning permission, so which would apply to the dwelling, the stables and the machinery store, and the conditions that are proposing to be imposed are on page 81 and 82 of the report. So there wouldn't be a condition obviously tying the stables to the dwelling as such, because the stables aren't in the dwelling, but what the condition says is that the stables should be used for the keeping of horses and ponies for storage and domestic and private use. So to prevent the applicant carrying out running a business from the site, which obviously could have greater implications for the neighbours, and those conditions would follow through if the building is sold. With regard to the Japanese knotweed generally isn't a planning matter. It's a private nuisance matter. If it spreads, it's a civil matter, and it's not controlled within the planning system. The only time the planning system would get involved is if a site is being developed that has known to have Japanese knotweed on it, as was the case with this application site. And the reason for that is to ensure that when the site's developed, the knotweed is controlled as part of that development. So strictly speaking, knotweed that's on the site now is not really a planning matter, but given that there was a condition on the original planning permission, and given that it wasn't satisfactorily complied with, then a new condition is proposed to be added to this to require that to be resolved and remedied, so that the whole site is then it's all the site's, you know, in terms of the planning, it's tidied up and it's all got its relevant conditions and permissions in place.
Thank you.
Thank you for that, Miss Patchen. I have two more speakers, first being Councillor Fuller.
I think that was me, you said, Chair. I'll go ahead anyway. I suppose two things come to mind in terms of the actual carrying out of the permission. The original, sorry, 2012 permission. Can we A, be certain that the building works took place within 3 years, and B, can we, or can the applicant prove that at the time at which they built the building, even if a day later they took them out, they actually built stables? Because if not, surely they haven't in any way complied with the basic planning permission that they were already under, as it were, in which case I would be surprised there wasn't some kind of action taken against them on the basis of that, even if they then could change it after a day and get around it. I think in terms of the current proposal, I get that we're essentially dealing with some external alterations. By the same route, I'd like to be reassured that we have pinned down all of the mistakes made for the previous applications, to make sure that, I mean, you've already mentioned business use, which is good, but that there are no future business uses, that we're not going to lose that stable to, I don't know, an additional pool or something else later on, and that if they then ignore whatever permission they're given this time, and whatever requirements there are, that there is actually a route which we can go down in order to actually seek some kind of redress, shall we say, or a change to what they're doing. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Fuller. I'll bring Llewellyn back. Llewellyn.
Thank you, Chairman, and
Do you want me to answer that?
Oh, well, I was going to do it, Lizette, but you're more than welcome
okay,
to.
go for it then.
Okay. I think the first point on whether they've built it or haven't built it, if we had a doubt, Councillor Fuller, or we could prove it, it would be in the committee report. When assessing lawful development certificates, which this applicant could go through, the council is instructed under the Planning Act to approve them without haste unless we have demonstrable evidence to the contrary. Unfortunately, what happens inside buildings, A, is not development, even if there's a condition requiring it to be built in accordance with the approved plans. I would never suggest we put a condition on that personally. But secondly, it's difficult to see when it happens. But as I said, this application has vexed officers for quite some time to make sure the right decision and recommendation is put to yourselves because of the long planning history and how we got to where we've got to. So I think if we could demonstrably say it definitely happened, and then say actually that what's there now has not been there for longer than 4 years, which I think it has, we might have a different recommendation, but our recommendation is based on what we know to be the case at the moment. And I also do feel for the neighbour, and I think some of the changes that have happened are unfortunate, but we now must assess it on the facts before us. On the future changes, this won't surprise you, unfortunately, those are matters for future consideration. If one of those buildings comes forward for another pool or something else, that'll be something for us, for yourselves as the planning committee or the officers under delegated, to make that assessment in due course, to assess the harm of that change. If it was to happen unlawfully, then we have other actions. Unfortunately, the planning system sort of is what it is, but we do our best.
Thanks,
Thank you
Llewellyn.
for that, Llewellyn. Thank you for that, for clearing it up. I've got Councillor Trelaw.
Thank you. My focus and questions are really surrounding the machinery and hay store. I appreciate that a dwelling was approved with this barn, and there might be an additional bedroom, and it's much more sort of elaborate and whatnot, and there are issues that it has changed, but as far as numbers of people occupying this site doesn't necessarily increase dramatically. Therefore, I feel I mean, it's in an AONB, but it's not like we're all of a sudden introducing new people to the area and the pressure that goes with that, even though I do have issues with that. But the machinery and hay store, is that something we would approve if we had if there was none of this history and there was an existing dwelling and they had a lovely sort of building which is for that agricultural purpose? Would we really approve it to become a pool and a gym? Is that really something that would be automatically granted? Because I feel like that is overdevelopment in the AONB. It's not additional sort of bedrooms or anything in that building, but it does seem quite grotesque in that setting. So could officers maybe clarify for me? I mean, I know we're being told to judge just on the external appearance, but is that something that we would just grant and sort of hand out? Anyone who's got a sort of an agricultural building could convert it automatically like that, because usage for me does seem to be quite significant, because it still is signifies overdevelopment in my mind, and we wouldn't necessarily grant that in someone's backyard in a built-up area. So why would we grant it here? I was wondering if officers could clarify that for me.
Sure. Do you want me to do that, Chairman?
Thank you. Yeah, I was going to say, obviously, we're looking at what's there tonight, but just in hindsight, if you want to go for it, Ms. Patchen.
Well, the building that's there now is essentially the building that was previously approved. The building that had permission. It's not an agricultural use. The site was a dwelling with equestrian use, so it's never been an agricultural use on the site. There's agricultural land at the back, which I believe the applicant owns, but it was the building is essentially a storage, machinery and hay store in connection with the application site, and possibly maintaining the field at the back. But there's no agricultural as such business being carried on by the applicant. And the only difference is that where I think it was a hay store at the end of the building, there's now a pool and there's accommodation in the roof space. But visually, appearance-wise, it's the same building. And I think it's not part of the consideration, but if somebody applied for a building for that purpose with a dwelling on the site, it's in keeping with the dwelling that's there in terms of its materials and form. So I think, why wouldn't we grant it planning permission? Would be my response.
Could
Thank you, Ms. Patchen.
Could I come back?
Come back, Georgia. Councillor Trelaw, yeah.
Yeah, I suppose technically, well, maybe when I said agricultural, I know there's technical sort of agricultural ties and all of that. So that's not really, so I wasn't really trying to make a point on that specific technicality, but more that if someone had an outbuilding, would we really, grant that, to become a sort of a luxurious sort of amenity space? I'm not sure. Yeah, it doesn't sit very well with me, that's all.
It wouldn't require planning permission because it's all, as Llewellyn explained previously with regard to the house, it's all part of the domestic use. So, for example, to use a garage scenario, it's a incidental building to the dwelling. You can then use it for other purposes in connection with the dwelling without needing planning permission, so it wouldn't have needed permission anyway.
Okay.
Okay, thank you for that. Llewellyn, before I go to the vote, Llewellyn, do you want to come back?
No, Lizette covered it.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Thank you, councillors. Nobody else indicating to speak. I think we've given this a good show. So we have one proposal proposed by Councillor Wimble, seconded by Councillor Philip Martin, to go with the officer's recommendation. Over to you, Mr. Mills.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Brooke.
4.
Councillor Collier.
4.
Councillor Fuller.
4.
Councillor Goddard.
4.
Councillor Mrs. Hollingsby.
4.
Councillor Keane.
Against.
Councillor Jim Martin.
Against.
Councillor Philip Martin.
4.
Councillor Mead.
Against.
Councillor Mayers.
Against.
Councillor Trelaw.
Against.
And Councillor Wimble.
4.
Chairman, I make that 7-4 with 5 against.
Thank you, Mr. Mills. Obviously, that application is approved. Thank you very much, councillors. Obviously, Copper Beach, Stelton Common has been withdrawn. You all got that confirmation earlier, councillors. So skipping that one, our next application is 202091 FH, land adjoining Seabourn Cottage, Underhill Road, Folkestone. And Katie Claw's going to take it first. Good evening, Katie.
Good evening, Chair. Good evening, members. Right, okay. I believe I can share my screen. Okay, is that coming up?
Yep, all good.
Okay. Okay, so this application is a retrospective application for the change of use of an agricultural field to a dog walking facility and associated field shelters and parking provision for customers. Okay, right, so this is the application site shown dotted here. This is the field with the access to the site. Okay, right, so this is the main field here with access to the site. This is Casebourn Cottage, which is the applicant's property. This here is Underhill Road. The orange dotted line indicates that this is a publicly maintainable highway. It's an unclassified road at this point, and it branches off here, and it's not publicly maintainable at this point. Underhill Road joins here with Horn Street, which is a classified C road. Just for members' interest, this is the settlement boundary, and the purple lines show public rights of way. So this is the junction of Horn Street with Underhill Road here to the right. There's some properties on Horn Street here that you can't see, and there's some parking spaces here. So this is the entrance to Underhill Road from Horn Street. As you can see, it is a single track lane. So this is on the approach to Casebourn Cottage, single track lane. This here is one of the neighbouring properties. This is Casebourn Farm and some of its associated outbuildings. So this here is where Underhill Road branches off. This is the publicly maintainable part up here. This drops down and serves the Casebourn Cottage and Green Acres. So this here shows that the road carries on down here and terminates down here. This is the neighbouring property of Green Acres. This is Casebourn Cottage. And from here you can see the access gate that would take members of the public using this facility to the dog walking field. So this is a slightly closer view. You can see the gate a bit clearer here. Parking provision for the customers is just to the side of the main building here. This is the garage associated with the applicant for their use. Customers would walk their dogs through here and up to the field at the back, and you can just see a bit of the fencing here for the field. So this is just another view. This is the Green Acres neighbouring property here, and just here would be the access and parking provision for the dog walking facility. And just as a photograph of the off-street parking provision associated with this change of use. So this is just an overall plan. So this is the car parking here, the access gate, and members of the public would bring their dogs up through here. And this is the field in question. So this is another photograph through the field. And this is part of the access. That's the gated entrance there. The neighbours, sorry, not neighbours, the applicant's garage. So in association with this application, 2 field shelters shown here on the plan. And these are photographs of the field shelters in situ with some of the fencing to the rear. Photograph here shows, so this is the northern part of the site, one of the field shelters, and a couple of the gates that lead you into the main field. And this photograph is looking the other direction. So this is like a dog washing water bowl area. You can see the fences and the field shelters in the background there. And that's it for presentation. And also I would like to draw members' attention to, I've had some additional comments on the file received since the publication of the supplementary papers and the additional supplementary papers. So I've had 3 letters in support and 3 in objection. The main points raised within the letters of support have previously been raised, but are as follows. The sheds that have been erected in the last few years. The application does not demonstrate that the need can only be met in its current location. Neighbours are not safely or sufficiently protected from the change of use. Existing fence heights are inadequate, and flooding issues. The main points raised within the letters of objection. So yes. Sorry, the main points raised within the letters of support have also previously been raised, and they are summarised as follows, so that it's a well-run business, it's a valuable local resource and asset to the area, a private and safe field, clean and litter-free, including dog waste disposal. Dog water, dog treats, toys and training aids are available. An online booking system allows plenty of time between visits, and there's no notable increase in noise or traffic. In addition to these comments, there were 5 further online comments today received, but these appear to be in relation to a boundary hedge, and it's more of a civil issue. They haven't been addressed here. Further to that information and from the additional supplementary sheets, the agent has also provided further written communication received yesterday. These mainly address some objection comments. So I shall summarise the letter for you. Under the heading Business Operations, with regards to concerns around dangerous dogs with livestock and the height of fencing, the fencing is considered to be sufficiently secure in terms of height and build quality. Dogs that use the fields are household pets and not defined as dangerous dogs. Dangerous dogs will not be used in the field. With regards to noise and pollution, the application was submitted with a comprehensive noise report, and the council's environmental health officer is satisfied that there is no noise nuisance. Under the heading Access Considerations, the access track that is secured by the gate, which was shown in some of the first photographs, is part of a joint arrangement between the applicant and the MOD. And MOD representative has visited the site and they are not concerned about access arrangements. The applicant and the MOD have open communication channels. The claims surrounding transport and parking are unsubstantiated. The submitted transport statement is thorough and compiled by professional transport planners. It was concluded that the proposal would not have a material impact on the local highway network. Upkeep of the private access should not be seen as a material planning consideration. There are no additional staff and sufficient parking has been provided. Kent Highway authorities did not object. Under the heading Environmental Considerations, Seabrook Stream is not contaminated due to the applicant's drainage works. The EA were consulted and raised no objection. Under the heading Support for Proposal, a large number of supporters are writing in support due to it being an important and valued and enjoyable local facility. And under the heading Support Documentation and Compliance with the granting of any planning application, there are no reasonable grounds to assume that planning conditions would not be complied with. And in fact, the granting of planning permission would provide a better opportunity to control future operation. And that's the conclusion, Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Claw. Thank you. We have 3 speakers on this. First being Lisa Stock, local residents speak against the application. Over to you, committee services. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Katie, can you stop sharing your screen, please?
I am just trying to. Apologies. Oh yeah, there we go. Sorry.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
It's encouraging that the LPA has recommended refusal in line with Hythe Town Council, and I hope that the committee agrees regarding the unsuitability of this rural location. The integrity of the application remains questionable. There are numerous sheds and floodlights in place, most of which the applicants say were there when the property was purchased. These are not in keeping with the rural landscape, and evidence of the untruth of this is shown on page 121 of tonight's agenda. The appearance of the area is suffering as a result. Equally worrying, however, is now the close proximity of dogs to livestock and horses, and the very real potential for injury to them or equine handlers. So far, a 12-year-old girl has sustained an injury while escorting her pony to its field, where access is now immediately adjacent to S&S Doggy Field. Problems with alarmed horses on my own land are now not unusual, and the applicants have often been made aware by witnessed meetings or client contact, despite their denial of this knowledge. Dogs don't need to have actual physical contact to spook horses or livestock into flight or stress. Just their presence nearby and scent with growls and barking can cause serious life-threatening behaviour or response by grazing and prey animals. This is having a negative impact on my business. Flooding issues continue. Unlicensed drainage remains in place, discharging into Seabrook Stream. The applicants state that I caused my own flooding. This can be disregarded since my culvert was built in full compliance with the Environment Agency's spec and sizing to be able to cope with flow. The major flooding I have experienced began within a month of their drainage works completion. Comments on the portal suggest that I am not alone in now having flood problems. This needs resolving before the next rainy period. The comment on this application from the EA is naturally in response to the information provided, which has previously been evidenced to be incorrect, i.e. drainage to soak away. This brings me to the traffic statement, which raised concerns at Hythe TC and by Councillor Rory Love. Traffic generation would adversely affect highway safety and the convenience of road users. Judgment has only been made based on the applicant's transport statement during lockdown and not on technical evidence. I'm surprised that no notice was taken of an actual highways employee's concern following his visit to the area during a period when more normal traffic was flowing. This business has been affecting the residential amenity of neighbours by reason of noise, disturbance and overlooking and loss of privacy. It's been operating unauthorised for well over 18 months with all the associated negative issues. So we'd ask that in the event of a refusal, an order for cessation of business is made, or that cessation order be for within 3 months rather than 6, which would bring the running period to 2 years, which frankly is too long. It shouldn't be possible for an urban pop-up business to cause disturbance like this and to be left to continue for 2 years. So I beg the council to refuse planning consent and to bring the issue to a close at its earliest opportunity. There is no level of mitigation that can convert this location's suitability, and work needs to be carried out particularly with the contamination and flooding issues and to return the landscape to its previous natural state.
Lovely, thank you very much. Our second speaker is Angelica Akwa Ludlow. local resident in support, and probably apologies for the spelling of the name. Thank you, committee service.
Hello, my name's Angelica Arake Ludlow and I'm a local resident living in Hawkinge. I am speaking at the committee for all the supporters of SNS Doggyfield. I am a frequent user of the dog field. I have 2 English Springer Spaniels. One is a very anxious and nervous 9-year-old, and then I have an 8-month-old puppy who obviously still needs a lot of training. The dog field is a place that I can actually take the dogs on my own when my husband is working. I'm able to be independent and take them there. I say that because I'm disabled. I have a muscle wasting disease and I'm in receipt of higher rate PIP for mobility. The field meets a huge need for me. There's parking right next to the dog field area. I can't walk very far, and unfortunately council dog exercise areas don't have that, or the car parking isn't guaranteed, so I wouldn't be able to use that on my own. The dog field is completely secure. It's got 6-foot high fencing. I know other dogs can't get in. My 9-year-old would potentially bolt, as he's been attacked in the past and is now very nervous and anxious of other dogs that might be aggressive towards him. If he bolted, I wouldn't be able to chase after him. As it's such a secure area, I can do training with my 8-month-old. Having effective recall is really important, especially with the new rules that were introduced on the 1st of April. They can also run off some of that excess energy. It's a beautiful location. I've been shielding for over a year now, and it's been my haven, quite literally my haven, a spot in the countryside that I can safely go to, knowing that I'm not going to be around other people. I know shielding is over, but the pandemic is still happening. I need to be somewhere that I'm not mixing with too many people still, and the dog field does that for me, as it is COVID secure. It also gives me peace of mind with all the dog thefts now. I'm very visibly a disabled woman. When I go there, I'm on my own. If I was elsewhere, I wouldn't actually go anywhere else now because of the dog thefts. And I've got a lot of friends who feel exactly the same way. We do worry very much about our dogs, as they are family to us. On your first visit, you are given very clear instructions by Claire and Pam about the do's and don'ts, and the expectations, and also about being mindful of the neighbours. I've never met other cars coming up the lane because there's such a gap between the arrivals and departures. It's 30 minutes, so it's plenty of time that cars wouldn't pass. It's just a safe place for our animals that we need in this area. There's literally nothing else like it locally. Thank you for listening, and we hope that you grant planning permission.
Thank you very much, Angelica. Our final speaker is Nick Kirby, the agent, to speak on the application. Thank you.
Firstly, I would like to clarify that the applicants, Ms Suddens and Ms Goodchild, did not apply for planning permission when starting the business, as they were simply unaware that planning permission would be needed. When they were invited to submit an application by the Council's Planning Department, a comprehensive application was duly prepared and submitted. The dog walking use is of significant value to local residents, and over 100 local people have written in support of the application. The dog walking field provides a valuable facility to local people to walk their family pets, and dog walking fields are highly endorsed by the Kennel Club generally for providing exercise in a controlled environment. They enable owners to walk dogs in a safe and secure environment away from other dogs, traffic and members of the public, which is extremely pertinent given high levels of dog theft. There are over 68 other dog walking facilities in the southeast, and many are within rural areas similar to this proposal, and even in AOMBs and national parks. Refusing this application will remove this important resource from local people, forcing residents to travel further for this facility and perhaps outside of the borough. The current application is informed by professional reports on important matters of acoustics and transport to ensure detailed impacts have been fully assessed and considered. There is no objection from Kent County Council in respect of highway safety. The council's environmental health officers are satisfied any noise generated will be small scale, in line with the small scale of the operation, which is limited to 4 dogs being walked at any one time. The applicants have also employed detailed management measures to ensure dogs do not present a disturbance or risk to surrounding animals, users or neighbours. It is my opinion as a chartered town planner that the planning officer's recommendation for refusal is incorrect. It dismisses the clear encouragement of national planning policies in support of rural businesses such as this. Rather, planning officers impractically suggest the business should be located within the settlement, where insufficient land would be available and disturbance to residential neighbours would be harder to avoid. Planning officers have also told you that fencing at the site that does not need planning permission, that was not erected for the dog walking business, can be controlled through this planning application, which is incorrect. In summary, I would urge you to recognise the value the facility provides to local residents. I would urge you to realise the impracticality of planning officers' suggestions that this use should be within the settlement and reconsider their proposed recommendation for refusal, instead issuing planning permission with conditions which allow the council to control its operation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kirby. Councillors, I have Councillor Jim Martin.
Thank you, Chair. This is in my ward, and I've had a lot of correspondence with regard to this. There's a number of issues for me on this. The first thing is that while we all, want to, love dogs, and it does give a facility for people to walk their dogs, but it's to the detriment of the animals that surround this facility. This is a farm, and there are often sheep in these fields. Horses regularly traverse and travel through and around this area. So I can't accept the argument that this is sort of very animal friendly, because it discriminates against the animals that were there previously, and the animal uses that was there previously. Secondly, it is Underhill Road is a very, 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 very narrow road. So there are major issues surrounding that. I've been to have a look, and the gate is as I understand it, in the ownership of the MOD. The screens, it is fully screened as per the photographs, and the overriding impression that I had is that this would be perfect if you had, as the person who spoke, a nervous or twitchy or dangerous dog. A dog that had to be kept apart from other dogs. Absolutely ideal for them. But of course, that's to the detriment of the animals that are in the surrounding fields. So I can't wear my sort of animal friendly hat with this, because we'd be discriminating in favour of dogs against sheep and horses. My other issue is regard to the drainage. We've had sort of 18 months of drainage into the Seabrook stream, and it's got to go into the Seabrook stream. It can't go anywhere else, and that's of concern. It looks awful. When you drive, you've just got a kind of rolling sweep up the hill there, over the top of that hill, and you're down into sort of Seam Valley golf course, and you've got all of this fencing, which looks awful. There's really nothing that I can say that would make it more attractive. Horn Street is a particularly dangerous road. I mean, everyone agrees that it is the most dangerous road in the district, particularly when the school is either taking pupils in or pupils coming out. It is very, 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 very dangerous road. I've read the traffic report, but that's my opinion as a local resident. So I would move to accept the officer's recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Martin. Do you have a seconder? Councillor Treloar's waving at me. Excellent. Councillor Treloar to second. Thank you for that, Councillor Martin. Fully appreciate that, being obviously Hive Town Council, obviously 5.1 comments, and you being a ward member. Very informative. Thank you for that. And it's Councillor Keane to go next. Councillor Keane.
I actually think this is a wonderful idea as somebody who's owned horses and dogs. It's very unusual, unless you've got a really unruly dog, that they will go after horses, because horses are a lot bigger. And I think with like the people that spoke in favour of this, there's so much dog theft now. There aren't places to walk dogs safely. It keeps dogs off the highway. It keeps dogs off of paths where we haven't got the problem with dog litter. You know, how can we discriminate against dogs and not horses? Having kept sheep and goats and all kinds of animals on I had a small holding, the dogs are as good as the people that control them. And people who are going to pay to walk their dogs in a dog walking park are not going to be people who are going to let their dogs off chasing livestock. I've had dogs and horses all of my life, and they've all lived together happily because I was responsible. And to pay for something like this, I think, is highly recommended, and I think we need more. I don't see it as a pop-up business. I see it as a small business that can benefit people who own dogs.
Thank you, Councillor King. Councillor Treloar.
Thank you, Chair. I don't dispute that it's a very useful and convenient business for people with dogs, but this is just in the wrong place. The impact on local residents on this very quiet, peaceful setting, and the surrounding countryside, the increase in traffic and the impact on local amenity, I think of where to outweigh someone's need, travelling across the district for this, to have their dogs cared for, compared to the neighbours in this very setting, who are suffering from this increase in noise and traffic, which for me is a very distinct and very prominent planning consideration in this case. Not to say what Councillor Martin raised about the impact on surrounding animals, but the general impact on the countryside. This is not in keeping with the countryside, and it's outside of the settlement boundary. So, as a model, and I appreciate more and more people have, they're getting dogs during the pandemic, and there is this need, but this is just not in the right place. I think the impact is too great on the immediate local residents and the countryside. So that's why I'm supporting the officer's recommendation here.
Thank you, Councillor Treloar. 3 speakers. Councillor Mead.
Thank you, Chair. I've looked at this really closely because I can see both sides of the argument on this one. I feel that the owners of the business have actually done everything that they can to ensure that the dogs are kept safe within this pasture field. They've looked at the parking, they've looked and agreed access with the MOD, and they've almost gone beyond the fencing, which I know Councillor Martin says is unsightly. As we saw in the report, fencing can be put up around any of these types of fields without planning permission, because it is part apparently of the countryside. when it comes to walking dogs, we really need to see what's going on at the moment. Yes, there are more dogs being owned because of lockdown, etc. But people are actually being mugged for their dogs. They're having their houses broken into. They can't walk in parks without their dogs being stolen. So I can see why the local residents are very, very keen on having somewhere that they see as a very, very safe place. That number one, they can take their dogs. Number two, if they have an anxious dog, they don't need to worry about it being around other humans. I totally understand about sheep and horses. My experience of that is as the sheep and horses get used to dogs being in a field, they move to the other side of the field so they don't get spooked. They're not idiot animals. We also have this big thing about extra traffic on Underhill Road. We're talking an extra 2 cars an hour. I don't actually see that as a traffic menace. I honestly believe, and it's rare for me to say this, but I honestly believe that this particular business is sustainable. As much as it is not within a village boundary, as was mentioned earlier, for the amount of space that you need, you wouldn't find this within a village boundary. So I am minded, but obviously still listening to other councillors to actually agree that this business should be allowed to continue. Thank you.
Councillor Mead. Councillor Hollinsby.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I'm very torn on this one as well, I have to say. I just wonder, we say it's in a rural area and we don't think it should be there, but then if we picked it up and put it in an urban area, would that not cause as many or more problems than we're already pointing out here? I mean, there would be traffic, there would be obviously more residents, more problem with noise, etc. So I'm just wondering, in that respect, why it's the wrong place. I'm listening with interest to what other councillors say, but I was surprised by the number of emails that I've received. I'm sure every other councillor's received in support of this application. Which is actually quite unusual. You usually get absolutely everybody all against, so I'm torn. I'm still listening to what other councillors are saying.
Thank you, Councillor Hollinsby. Councillor Wimble.
Chairman, I'm totally torn. Being a dog owner myself, but also, as you well know, my ex-partner had a livery stable, the first person that spoke alluded to the fact that her business was going to be affected, and I gathered from what she said that her business is horses, so she had her business there first. So huge sympathies with that. The MOD had no issue. It looked like a well-managed and maintained site. I do have a few issues with what Councillor Mead said about dog napping and things like that. Yes, it has been a problem over lockdown. I think it may be exaggerated in the media more than it actually has been. But I think it's very important that we can have somewhere safe to go and exercise dogs. Down here on the seafront by the golf course, we've got a gated area that the golf course maintain. You can let your dogs run free there. It's well looked after, but it's nowhere near as well managed as this site appears to be. I've got sympathy with the local residents. The town council obviously know this far better than I do, this area. So my sympathies are with the lady who spoke first, whose business she claims will be affected. If you're running a riding business, I know very well that horses can be spooked. We had a road that ran past where I used to live, and if a car or a motorbike went flying by, and we had a dressage arena there, I witnessed several accidents because of that. So dogs and horses don't necessarily mix. If you've got a dog that's a bit boisterous, or you're trying to train the dog, this would be the ideal place to take it. But again, it's going to cause issues with horses. We all know about dogs and sheep don't mix, but I can't see how the dogs, with the screening there, as I think it was Councillor Keane again said, you know, horses tend to go to the other side of the paddock. So I'm always very hesitant to go against officers' recommendations. I can see the things for it and the things against it. I wouldn't want to propose a motion to go against the officers' recommendations because I'm not sure on what grounds you would do it. I agree with what Councillor Hollingsby said. You know, the very first council planning meeting we had under this council, we had a riding stable down in Lydd, and I fought for it. The council officers recommended refusal because it was outside of the town boundary. You know, you cannot put a riding stable inside the town centre. But maybe this isn't the right place for it. But I've got so much sympathy for dog owners because if I didn't have somewhere to exercise my dog, this would be ideal. So I'm really, really torn. And I don't think I'll be making my mind up until we actually cast a vote and hear what other councillors say. But it's my feelings are that I want to support it, but I also can see why it should possibly go with officers' recommendations for refusal.
Thank you, Councillor Wimble. Councillor Philip Martin.
Thank you, Chairman. Like most of the councillors, this is a very, very difficult situation. My ex-partner kept horses and certainly had dogs for 40 years. I think there's several aspects to this. I can't remember now who it was that said, you know, it really wouldn't be suitable, I don't think, in an urban area at all. You know, I think this sort of operation sits quite comfortably in a rural location. I imagine that there may in fact be some people there that use it that possibly, you know, well, I think we heard about one that's disabled or who actually are not really within reach of exercising areas for dogs. This might in fact actually, you know, keep some of them off the streets, you know, because I mean, dogs, how many times have you had somebody walk into you walking a dog and things like that, you know? So, you know, I can see quite a lot of benefits for it. It's well secured and so forth. No, we don't, you know, we don't particularly like, and it is difficult going against officer recommendation, but I think their recommendation to refuse is somewhat weak. And I'm not going to propose it again. I'll wait and see what my colleagues say about this, but I'm not happy about turning this down. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Martin. Before I move on to Councillor Keane and Councillor Fuller, Helena Payne would like to come in. Helena.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to take the opportunity just to come back on a few of the comments councillors have raised in discussions this evening.
Yes, please.
The first really sort of surrounds itself on the principle of the development and the location of the proposal. I think, just to clarify, I don't think we're saying that the facility is not needed. What we're saying is that it, you know, what we're asking, what we're saying is it needed in this location? You know, no evidence in the form of sequential approach has been provided to demonstrate that the use must be in this location, other than it happens to be on land within the applicant's ownership. And therefore, in the officer's view, the site, whilst relatively sustainable, the proposal would require reliance on the car to facilitate its use. Aside from this, the location itself is not suited to a business use in the manner proposed. The applicant has provided a list of other similar uses, some of which are within rural / open countryside locations. And the examples that have been provided are within the southeast. We're not generally confined to Folkestone Hythe. So, you know, I must remind members that each site must be determined on its own merits. And in addition to those example sites outside of our jurisdiction, other local planning authorities would have their own set of policy objectives, which, whilst guided by national planning policy, may differ from our own. And for Folkestone and Hythe, the proposal would be principally at odds with our own policy criteria, and those criteria are set out in paragraph 7.6 of the officer's report. And there are certain criteria which any proposed use or development would need to adhere to in order to be considered acceptable development within the countryside. And the argument is that in this case, it doesn't naturally require a rural area. Why this location? And I think the bottom principal line is we haven't been given any justification for this, and for that reason, we aren't able to conclude that it is the right location for the dog walking facility in this case. We know that the NPPF states, amongst other things, that leisure development, and this proposal could fall within that category, must respect the character of the countryside. And it's considered that the use of the site for dog walking, including the paraphernalia within it or surrounding it, would not suit this rural location. So essentially the onus falls on the applicant to justify the rural location, and it's not considered adequate justification has been provided in this case. So hopefully what I've said now has clarified a few points the councillors have raised. May I also touch base on the point about the fencing? While I've got your attention, you are correct. The applicant is right. He has advised that they would be able to erect a fence of less than 2 metres under their permitted development rights. This is correct. However, where these structures are required to facilitate or support a use, we are duty bound to consider their impact. And in this case, whilst the applicant has advised that the fencing is not required as part of the dog walking business, they have also advised that the fencing would prevent any dogs escaping from the field into adjacent land and would protect livestock horses from being adversely impacted upon. So in consideration of this, it is considered that the fencing is therefore required in order to mitigate against any detrimental impact that may result in the fencing if the fencing were not in place. In addition, it could be argued that this type of fencing would not be erected as a standalone development surrounding a rural field if it were not to facilitate the dog walking business. And as such, members are advised that as part of any forthcoming enforcement case, should members follow officer recommendation today, we would request that the fencing be removed in its entirety. This follows similar stances to other enforcement cases where structures had been erected that would otherwise not require planning permission, but are required to facilitate an unlawful use. Hopefully, Chairman, that clarifies a couple of the points. I hope I haven't missed anything else, but I'm happy to help if I have. Thank you.
No, thank you very much. Excellent to bring us up to speed with that. Thank you. Councillor Keane.
Thanks, Chair. I've just got a couple of things that have come to mind. I don't understand how a dog walking park will cause flooding or any more flooding that's already there. In a livery yard, you're using water all the time. You're filling buckets, you're hosing horses down, you're cleaning out stables. You use a lot of water. I don't see how they're using a lot of water causing flooding in a dog walking field. Also, we're saying about the environmental impact. Livestock have a far bigger impact on the environment than dogs. I have kept a lot of animals. I've had cows, I've had sheep, I've had everything. None of them were for human consumption. They were pets. But I was aware of the impact that they had because you read all about it. The other thing that concerns me is we're saying that people are driving to the dog walking park. Do they not drive to the livery yard? Are you telling me that everybody who's got a horse on that livery yard lives within walking distance or on the yard? And finally, the livery yard will also have field shelters. And from what I've seen in the pack, that's all they've got is field shelters. They're not there forever. They're movable buildings. They're wooden sheds. So what I'm saying is, how can we say that a livery yard doesn't impact on travel and cars on that road? And how can we say that it's the dog walking park that's causing the flooding? I have been on my yard when people have left taps running and I've had floods. So I would assume that if a dog walking park's causing flooding, they've got a tap running all the time.
Thank you. I'm going to just quickly bring Helena Payne back in to clarify that. Thank you, Helena.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Just to clarify, officers have not raised objection to the proposal on traffic highway grounds. And in addition, in terms of flooding drainage matters, these are matters outside of the application area. I believe that the applicant is in discussions with the EA on sorting out drainage flooding matters, but we haven't raised objection to the proposal on those grounds in this case. So, thank you.
Thank you, Helena. I've got a couple of councillors, but before we go, I know we've got one proposal on the floor to support the officer's recommendation, but obviously I can see where a lot of people are sort of uneasy / not making their mind up, don't know which way to go. So I would like, if I've got any support, about deferring this, going back to the applicant and asking for justification, the subsequential test, if you wish, and see if the applicant can justify the applicant that we're discussing. So just think on that, councillors. If we can do that and go back and the officers talk to the applicant and see if we can get some justification on why this should be there and get some evidence for that. So think on that, and in the meantime,
Chairman,
I'll go to
I think
Councillor
that's
Fuller.
a good idea. I was going to suggest it myself.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Hollinsby.
So I'd second you if you're putting it forward.
Yeah, obviously, like I say, we have got the proposal. I'm sort of looking at Councillor Martin, looking at Councillor Treloar, if they would withdraw that and go with the deferral, so we can get more information on this. As a lot of members are looking around, thinking, "How do I do it? What should I do?" etc., etc. I just think it would be good for the officers to go back and to discuss this further with the applicants. So, like I say, I will make that proposal if Councillor Martin and Treloar are happy with that, or if they want their proposal to stand. But we'll think on that. I'll go to Councillor Fuller next because he's obviously hasn't spoken and he's indicated to speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I have enormous sympathy with this because, frankly, I don't think there's ever been a time in my life when there hasn't been a dog around in some way, shape, or form. And my aunt used to keep horses, so I totally understand about their needs as well. But from the point of view of what we were considering, we're being asked to, or effectively, the officer's recommendation seems to be that, one, the application doesn't enhance the area, as it were. It doesn't look very nice, for want of a better word or phrase. And secondly, their suggestion is that the application or this particular facility doesn't need to be in the countryside, as it were. It can be in an urban area. Now, on the first one, as it's kind of next to stables and things like that, I'm not sure I can. I think that's a pretty weak argument, to be honest, because I think that having a working stables and I don't think that necessarily enhances the area. So I'm not entirely convinced by that. So it kind of leads me on to the second argument, which is whether or not you could actually have a dog walking area somewhere other than off of Orne Street in the middle of nowhere. And the fact of the matter is that there are already 2 dog walking areas in Sandgate. One is Military Road and the other is on Sandgate Hill. And both of them are on the map, as it were, on Google Maps as dog exercise areas. And they're probably not used as much as they should be, but they provide all of the facilities you would need. So, you've got bins for your dog waste. In fact, in the Military Road one, we provide the actual bags to put the waste in as well. We're very generous in Sandgate. So from that point of view, even though I have enormous sympathy, and even though I've had and indeed got a couple of high-strung dogs myself, so I do kind of understand the need to be away from people having when my daughter used to go to Sandgate Primary, I used to walk up Sandgate Hill a lot. I should do so more often. But when you walk up there, that dog exercise area is a little known gem. It's not busy. There's not loads of dogs in there. There's not that risk of you because it's out of the way, really. Even though it's next to an A road, there's not really that risk of you being mugged in quite the same way. Although there might be now that I've publicised it. But realistically, those two dog walking areas kind of back up the officers on their point, which means that on balance, I probably have to agree with the officers, even though, as I say, I find their beauty of the area argument a bit shakier. I think generally a dog exercise area can be delivered in an urban area because it already is being. So I hope that helps some councillors come to a decision.
Thank you, Councillor Fuller. Llewellyn wants to come in.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a really quick one to follow up on Councillor Fuller's points. The council does provide numerous dog walking facilities, some in Sandgate, Folkestone and Cheriton. What I'd also notice is that the livery yard is a use which intrinsically requires a rural location. I don't think officers are saying we'd pick this up and put it in a residential location in an urban area. It might be in a less sensitive urban area, it might be in a less sensitive rural area, such as, a non-AONB rural area. That's part of the consideration tonight. Hopefully Councillor Martin hasn't missed too much.
No, I was just about to pick up, we lost Councillor Martin for a couple of minutes, but I've just let him back in. All okay, Councillor Martin?
Thank you very much. My machine just decided it wanted to restart on me, so sorry. Chair, would it be okay if I just clarified a couple of points?
Yes, you can. Yes, go ahead.
There is no stable next to this facility. There's the adjoining owner keeps sheep. It's just that horses walk across this land. There is no stable. There's no livery yard. There's nothing. They keep sheep. So it's not horses horses could be scared by the barking dogs, but it's the sheep and the lambs that are is what the adjoining owner wrote to me about her principal concerns were. So I know we've got rather obsessed with stables this evening, quite understandably, but there isn't a stable there at all. So it's not a choice of dogs over horses, or it's sheep in the thing, and sheep aren't there all the time. But anyway, that's it. I just want to make that point because I think I led people down the wrong track there.
Thank you, Councillor Martin, and thanks for the punt. Councillor Mead.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to take up the point regarding the fencing. They're saying that the fencing is ugly and it's to keep the dogs in and away from horses or sheep. However, they have a right to have that fencing up to stop sheep and horses coming into their area. So there is no justification, I believe, to actually ask them to take it down. I totally also understand that we do have walking facilities, locally. However, the majority of them are not enclosed and are not giving a facility where you can actually ensure that your dog is not interacting, shall we say, with another dog. And if you have a particularly nervous dog, if you have a dog that may be a bit boisterous, I mean, I know Springer Spaniels tend to be a bit crazy and jump up and down a lot. Or if indeed you have an older dog that doesn't want to interact with other dogs, it just seems to me that this facility offers hope and support on that. But Chair, I'd actually like to support your idea of deferral, so that the applicant actually has a time to prove why it should be in this area. So I'd like to put that out to the rest of the councillors. I'd like to go for deferral on this one, please.
Thank you, Councillor Mead. Yeah, obviously I did make it a proposal. Obviously, Councillor Trelaw and Councillor Martin are going to go with their recommendation, their proposal for the recommendation, and I accept and fully appreciate that. But yes, you're right. I just think you're right. We can go back to the officers can talk to the applicant and get further details and see where we can bring it back to a future meeting. I've got Councillor Philip Martin and Councillor Fuller. Then we shall wrap this one up. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. My comments were going to be made before actually the officer, and I think it was Llewellyn, said about the parking and the amount of traffic wasn't a consideration. I just wanted to really concur with Councillor Nicola Keane that in fact I've literally just got livery at the end of my road and we get more traffic down there than we do for the whole of the residents. And those that aren't in a car have got dogs and they're walking down there. So sometimes dogs and horses do mix. Thank you.
Okay, lovely. Thank you, Councillor Martin. Councillor Fuller, you wanted to come back?
Yeah, I'll keep it quick. Just to say that the 2 dog walking spots I mentioned in Sandgate are both enclosed. It doesn't deal with your high-strung dog issue, but it does deal with them not running off onto the high street or wherever.
Lovely. Thank you for that, Councillor Fuller. Thank you, councillors. Right, we've got 2 proposals, take them in the order they came. First being going with the officer's recommendation of refusal proposed by Councillor Jim Martin, seconded by Councillor Trelaw. Over to you, Mr. Mills.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Brooke. Against. Councillor Collier.
Against.
Councillor Fuller.
For.
Councillor Goddard.
Against.
Councillor Mrs. Hollingsby.
Against.
Councillor Keane.
Against.
Councillor Jim Martin.
For.
Councillor Philip Martin.
Against.
Councillor Mead.
Against.
Councillor Mayers.
Against.
Councillor Trelaw.
For.
And Councillor Wimble.
Against.
Chairman, there was 3 for and 9 against.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mills. Obviously, that motion's lost, so we go to my motion, councillors, of deferral, so the officers can talk to the applicant and agent, proposed by myself, seconded by Councillor Hollingsby. Mr. Mills.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Brooke.
For.
Councillor Collier.
For.
Councillor Fuller.
For.
Councillor Goddard.
For.
Councillor Mrs. Hollingsby.
For.
Councillor Keane.
For.
Councillor Jim Martin.
For.
Councillor Philip Martin.
For.
Councillor Mead.
For.
Councillor Mayers.
For.
Councillor Trelaw.
For.
And Councillor Wimble.
For.
That's 12 for, none against, Chair.
Thank you, unanimous. I think that's a good decision, councillors, and appreciate the officers and appreciate the debate there, councillors. Sensible way forward. Thank you. Moving on to the final application of the evening, councillors. 201918FH, 303 Cheriton Road, Folkestone. And it's Katie Claw to take us through it again. Thank you, Katie.
Hi, yes, thank you, Chair. Right. Share my screen. Right, okay. Okay, can you see that? Yeah, is it coming up?
Yep.
Yeah, wonderful. Okay, super. Right. So this is an application for change of use and conversion of the ground floor retail unit and office into a residential unit including alterations to the front elevation in the form of alterations to the fenestration and partial rendering at ground floor level. Right, okay, so this is the application site here. This is along Sheraton Road. Right, so this is the site outlined in red at the moment. So it's commercial, 2 residential flats above. This is the Windmill Cafe on the corner, and this is a row of residential properties, and this is residential to the rear. So this is the application site from the front. This is the existing frontage, which has been slightly altered in the past from a previous permission to convert the upper floors. So this is a separate door into the residential, and this is the door that serves the existing commercial, with the Windmill Cafe here and the residential properties here set back slightly. So this is from the side. So this is the Windmill Cafe, and as part of the application submission, there is a courtyard area. So it's just sort of, you can't see it, but the courtyard area would be within here. And this is the residential properties to the rear of the site. So it's bounded on these 3 sides. So this is looking the other way. So this is the application site here. It's Sheraton Road. This is Sheraton Pizza here. So this is another commercial unit. They sort of read as bookends to this wholly residential development here, which is actually set back from these. And this site forms part of the, I've completely forgotten what the word is. It's the Sheraton District Centre, so policy RL5 of the PPLP. So both of the commercial units here fall within RL5, as does Sheraton Pizza here. So this is an aerial view. So you've got the application site here. This is Windmill Cafe. Got Quick Fit, I think it's ATS here. A church building here, Shell Garage, Fulix, the pizza shop, and then obviously down the high street are other commercial units. So this is showing you the proposed ground floor. So there are changes to the front, which make use of this existing door here that serves the upper floor flats. You would come in and into the ground floor unit. Single bedroom unit, and with an access here, which gives them use of the ground floor courtyard area. So externally, the changes are the removal of the shop front window and door to be replaced with a window, and with the existing door here. And since the, sorry, let me just find my document. Since the publication of the supplementary papers and the additional supplementary papers, a comment has been received from an interested party that noted that this was going to committee. So they've put in a letter of objection, and the main points I've written down as follows: that they would have objected if they had been made aware of the application sooner, as the loss of a shop in Sheraton concerns all residents and not just the 14 neighbours who received a letter. The same property has had refusals previously on similar grounds. The site has not been advertised in the last 12 months. Retail and commercial properties in Sheraton are in demand, even during the pandemic. It would mean the loss of a valuable retail outlet in Sheraton. The opportunity for retail or commercial use has not been presented to locals, and it would make an attractive shop for startup business. In addition, the applicant provided a written communication to us received on the 19th of April in support of their application. And the main points are summarised, which is that it was purchased over a year ago, renovated the upper floor flats, which were let out within a week. There were at least 6 people interested in each flat, which demonstrates the need for housing of this type in Sheraton. The ground floor has been derelict and vacant for many years. The premises have not been used for its intended purpose for more than 7 years. It's an unwelcoming, unused building, which we feel has been detrimental to the locality. A change in consumer behaviour means this small unit is not needed in this part of Sheraton, but marking housing is much needed. As of the 18th of April, there are at least 13 empty commercial properties within half-a-mile radius of the site. The letter then lists 14 sites within Sheraton Road and Sheraton High Street. They appreciate and understand the local plan, but they consider that a change of use would enhance the locality. The plans to convert rather than add to the long list of vacant and unsightly commercial properties in Cheriton Road. The fact the site has been vacant for more than 7 years shows there's no demand, but they have demonstrated the need for one-bed flats given on how quickly the upper floors were let. They feel their design is sympathetic, and the renovation will complement the local area, bringing much needed housing, which provides for the local community. And that the council officers have recommended refusal due to the building being within the Cheriton shopping area, given the demonstrable lack of demand for this type of property commercially and the overwhelming demand for local market housing respectively, appealed to the committee to consent the application. And that concludes the report, Chair.
Thank you, Katie. Another excellent report. Thank you very much. Councillor, everybody's dived at the hands. Surprise, surprise. Councillor Wimble.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, a couple of things spring to mind. I've always been against turning commercial properties into residentials. Smaller shop units in particular are always sought after, and I know are in short demand, despite what was said in the report there. Also wonder if the owner has been getting the rate relief, a small business rate relief on this building, has been taking money from the council over the last 12 months that he thinks or she thinks it might be good to pay for this conversion into a dwelling. So I'm personally against turning it into a dwelling and supporting small businesses, many of which I know local to the area are looking for businesses, premises to rent.
I'll turn myself on there. Councillor Mead, straight over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to propose that we actually accept the officers' recommendations on this. We have seen quite clearly that they haven't marketed it at a decent amount for the last 12 months, which is, as we've discussed earlier, part of the regulations, part of the rules that we have to go under for planning. If they haven't done that, then our hands are tied whichever way we want to go. They need to do that before they can actually apply to turn it into a residential. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So that's a proposal to go over the officer's recommendation. You got a seconder?
I'll second that.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Councillor Keane?
Yeah, I'll second that.
You were slightly louder than Councillor Martin. And talking about Councillor Martin, Councillor Philip Martin to speak now.
Can you hear me? I'm never sure about
this. Yes, go for it.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah. I can't really believe that, that I feel that I should go against the officer's recommendation twice at one meeting. I speak not just as a Folkestone resident my whole life practically, but also as someone who's run small businesses until I retired for about 40 years. Now, we've already heard that there are some 30 shops vacant. So how can it be that there's a huge demand for them? I mean, when I was looking for premises, in fact, still for a shop, but for charity, there was absolutely loads of them available. So I don't know where this comes from. And the other point is that we've heard this before where there's been no proof of marketing. Well, I'm sure a lot of you realise that when people market a property, it's not always necessarily glaring at you in the local press or the local, social media or whatever it is. And of course, there is a massive demand. I mean, I've been out of the estate agency business for 4 or 5 years, and I still get phone calls from people, have you got any flats to let? You talk to people that are looking for accommodation. Yes, the principle, as Councillor Wimble says, I mean, we want small businesses, but clearly for it to have been empty for whatever reason for 7 years. I mean, when I bought my second or third shop, it was dilapidated. And I eventually, it wasn't being advertised by an agent, and this is going back in the 80s, but I actually managed to track down the agent. and I managed to secure that shop before the bloke went bankrupt, you know. So it's always been difficult with stuff like this. I think we just need to look at it from a practical point of view. Now, when you look at that building, yes, as you say, the top part has been converted into residential, and they've made probably some attempt at the bottom, but I mean, it's definitely in keeping, and it's not in the main thoroughfare there, you know. As I say, it's a difficult one, but I personally think that would make much better use of the thing, give somebody a home. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Martin. Councillor Brooke.
Hello. Yeah, I just want to just quickly say, normally I would absolutely support this, but because they haven't followed the rules and regulations that we set out as a council, then yeah, absolutely, I will be supporting the officer's recommendation for refusal on this. Yes, a lot of shops will need to turn into houses as we move forwards, and that's one of the reasons why we have the test of showing the planning authority that you actually have taken the time to put this out to tender, trying to get someone to be a tenant there before we consider turning it into domestic. But that's all I just wanted to say, that I will be supporting the officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brooke. With no other councillor indicating to speak, I have one proposal, councillors. Proposed by Councillor Mead and seconded by Councillor Keane, to go with the officer's recommendation of refusal. Over to you, Mr. Mills.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Brooke.
4.
Councillor Collier.
4.
Councillor Fuller.
4.
Councillor Goddard.
4.
Councillor Hollingsby.
4.
Councillor Keane.
4.
Councillor Jim Martin.
4.
Councillor Philip Martin.
Against, even if I'm the only one.
Councillor Mead.
Councillor Martin, you're absolutely entitled to do that, but I'm for.
Councillor Mayers.
4.
Councillor Trelaw.
4.
And Councillor Wimble.
4.
Chairman, that's 11 for, 1 against.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Mills. Mr. Mills, sorry, and thank you, councillors. That brings us to the end of the evening. Thank you very much for the debate. Thank you, officers, Gemma, Mr. Mills and Llewellyn and Eleanor and the rest of the crew and Katie. Thank you very much. Excellent meeting. Well done.